welcome to the Balkans in Europe program of N1 Television and European Fund for the Balkans. I'm Ivana Dragicevic.
And I'm Borjan Jovanovski. The EU-Turkey deal concluded in March this year relieved Europe from the pressure of the refugee crisis, but the relevance of this deal was short-lived. In July already, a failed coup took place which, instead of consolidation democracy in Turkey, caused a new tsunami over human rights and freedom, which EU cannot afford to ignore.
So for its part, Turkey, which is the gatekeeper of the refugee influx to Europe, an influx that the latter can hardly bear, has now placed an ultimatum: a free visa regime in October or an end to the March deal. The game is on and the results will be known in a couple of weeks. So can EU do without Turkey and Turkey without the EU?
These are the questions of this edition of Balkans in Europe, in which our guests are Mr. Kirkos Militiadis, who is a vice chair of the delegation of the European Parliament for the relations with Turkey, and Mr. Andrey Kovacchev, the member of subcommittee of human rights.
So, what do you say? Will we continue our good relations concerning the March deal, or what kind of scenarios can we accept?
Look, we are neighbors, and as neighbors, we need to cooperate together, especially now when we have such a huge challenge as the migration crisis, which we don't see when will be finished and when in Syria we will have finally acceptable situation that the people can stay there and be secured for their life and the life of their families. So from one side, we need to look at the democracy in Turkey, very critical, and continue with our suggestion, advice, opening also chapters from the EU Turkey negotiation process, but very important. This do not mean full membership of Turkey in the European Union. This is absolutely non-possible for this time, as for the this time and midterm in the future. Absolutely not possible. But we should use the instrument of the accession process for supporting the civil society in Turkey, for supporting the democracy, the freedom of press, and all other values what for us are important. And from other side, to deal with the migration crisis. For sure, we say in the Balkan, and this is a Turkish word, komşi. So we should try to be with our neighbor in good relations and to keep the contact with them, to keep the deal with Turkey, although it's very difficult, but seems, and for the moment, we have results on this. Yeah. Last year we had per day, sometimes in Greece, 10,000 refugees coming. Yeah. Now it's down to 100, 200 refugees per day, sometimes. That means it's working. However, how long will work, and if they will find new ways, like from Turkey through Bulgaria, this is something what we need to be prepared internally. European Union with new European border guards, with protecting the border, with our migration policy internally, but also externally with the deal with Turkey.
And expecting human rights of the refugees also.
But time is short. We are talking about October. The Turkish authority are asking the visa liberalization or end of the March agreement.
Can it be possible? Yeah.
If you remember, the first deadline was in June, expressed by President Erdogan and the Turkish ambassador in Brussels.
It was
Mr.
before
Yener.
the failed cap.
It was before, but it was the first deadline. Yeah. So we have seen politicians happily setting deadlines, but then the technical parties get involved, and we see that the solution is reached in one way or another.
So there is no worry, maybe?
No, it is always worry when you have to deal with refugee influx. And maybe the March agreement, which is extremely important for Greece and for Europe, stands in place. We must not forget that you have the African road that's feeding Italy, and through Italy, Europe. And then the deal is not yet in place. There is a deal, like the one in Turkey, about investment in Africa, which links migrants, economic migrants influx with investment in African countries, but this is still open. But to come back to your reply, to my reply to your question. The question of visa is very important. Out of 72 steps, the Turkish authorities have finished 68, and we have two major problems. One is the anti-terrorist law, and there are many discussions in that point, and I'm an optimist that we will find the solution. And also is the practical issue, because if we want to have passports with biometric data, you need to change the whole way the apparatus of the bureaucracy works. So that may take time, and this time, which is in place, Turkey cannot overcome that time, may give Europe and Turkey the time they need to finalize the agreement. So yes, I'm an optimist that in October we will not have a meltdown on the relations, because Turkey and Europe have no other future than trying to tighten the relations, either by setting a date for accession, which is not for the present, or by going deeper and deeper, the customs union, the refugee crisis, and the cooperation in Syria.
And
so we have a lot to do with Turkey, and Turkey has a big neighbor with huge economic ties that has to look upon.
And both of your countries have walls towards Turkey,
Yeah,
am I right?
One issue what I need also to address is very important. The Turkish economic, progress in the last years, what make Erdogan very popular, is also much based on Europe, on this custom union, on Europe. The Turkish welfare is based on this. That means not only Europe needs Turkey now with the migration crisis, but Turkey needs desperate also Europe for the economy. And they cannot replace Turkey with European Union with Russia, for example, as some people say, okay, they may be going now to be more with Russia. This is absolutely not realistic. So both sides need each other, and I don't think ultimatums or something like now it's 5th of October or what date, and we are stopping the process. I don't believe in this. Turkey needs to fulfill the obligations, which are technical obligations, what my colleagues already mentioned. And then when it's ready, then we will adopt what we agreed with them.
What's your assessment about the human rights situation in Turkey?
And you talked about anti-terrorism law, under which basically you can suppress either opposition, human rights groups,
or ethnic.
I'm asking overall because the thing is going worst. It looks like. So
that's indeed a very point of very concern. In the last years, always the European Parliament voted the resolutions on Turkey with a very critical mass on recommendations and on criticism towards all these points: rights, minority, press, freedom of press, the legislation. But after the coup d'état, we see that it's worsening, and the answer is much stronger that from our point of view than needed. There's a bit lack of argumentation why the government need to release so many teachers, for example, so many journalists, so many people from different professional fields or from prepared lists a few hours after the coup d'état. This is something what is not very easy to explain. For sure, after a coup d'état, need to have some clean up and see how could happen and why it's possible.
Yeah.
But this reaction should be moderate and adequate to the situation, and not try to overcome the democratic principles. We must stay very critical. I think, and what I said before, the opening of the articles of the chapters in the EU-Turkey negotiations.
That's the next question about
help.
Have you ever spoke with your colleague from Turkey within a delegation after the sales camp about this worsening of
I also made a visit to the Turkish Assembly
rights
and met with the speakers of the House and the leaders of the parties. It seems that in Europe we have a misunderstanding on our conception, because our reply to the coup was very hesitant. For some hours, not only the European leaders, but also US leaders. Mr. Biden's first reaction was appalling. We think that democracy comes à la carte. when it is for a nation that we like, we react immediately. When it is for a nation that we have second thoughts, then we are hesitant.
So you have an understanding for the Turkish position?
We saw that the whole of the political spectrum in Turkey was against the coup, and they supported, and people came to the streets to defend Turkey. That was not understood by Europe. That's why the main sentiment in Turkey is that Europe betrayed them, that Europe was delayed. And this is not a sentiment worked by the governing party who feeds the nationalism. No, it's a sentiment coming from opposition, but also from parties of the opposition, like the HDP, simply said, the Kurdish group that still supported the opposition to the. It has no need to fuel the Turkish nationalism, which is used against it. So we see that Turkish society, for a moment, stood still and defended against this coup. And this is something that Europe could not understand because we were
Mr.
late.
Schulz, your president, appeared in Ankara only on 1st of September.
Because we do not know how to place the equilibrium. On the one hand, we needed to support to solidarity for the democracy of Turkey. On the other hand, we have to be critical, as my colleague said, about the violations of the rule of law. It's impossible to jungle these balls, and we have shown it. The resolutions we have are not for us to have a nice conversation in the parliament. Either they have an impact in Turkish society and government, or it's no need to have them. So now we lost a step. We must go back and see how we will again connect with all the forces in Turkey that have a European orientation. And these forces also felt betrayed because of lack of immediate reaction to the coup. So these first must be taken by Europe first. For example, we in our joint parliamentary committee, we have a discussion. Usually they come here on the first of each year in September, so they should come here. So we have an idea of proposing having the JPC hold in Ankara, in the parliament that was bombed, to show that Europe shows solidarity, and from that point of solidarity can also express concerns about the human rights, about the freedom of the press, about the reforms in judicial. We gain the moral ground, and then we use it to cooperate with the forces in Europe that look upon, in Turkey, that look upon Europe. This is the way that I see things.
But the crisis is multiplying. We heard German Chancellor Merkel a couple of days ago. She said that the similar deal to EU-Turkey should be established with Libya and Tunisia. So basically we have new fronts in Europe, making new allies with a country as Libya, where basically I think international system failed as we are looking what's going on in Libya for a couple of years. So can we still hold Mr. Erdogan as one of the most accountable partners of Europe in this kind of circumstances and entourage we're living in?
Mr. Erdogan is the elected leader of Turkey, so we are dealing with Mr. Erdogan. This is for sure, and I can only agree on what my colleague said, that indeed the perception in the big part of the Turkish society was that it was not very clear the position of Europe on this coup d'etat. I heard also talks with some people from the opposition, which are normally against the AKP and Erdogan, but very clear against the coup d'etat and the people supporting the Turkish democracy and not one or other party that we misunderstood a bit. And to regain again the trust between the two parts, European Union and Turkey, also need some steps from our side, what also my colleague mentioned, that we be honest with them, that we condemn for sure any kind of terrorism, any kind of attempt to change the democratic system by violence, but also to be honest that we do not accept some steps by the Turkish government, especially on minorities, especially on freedom of press.
Can we accept the enlargement of the purge that started after the failed cup? Because there is apparently huge operation of the Turkish security forces in order to purge all the people that are suspected to be pro-Gulen. And this operation is ongoing, for example, in the Western Balkans. We have a case in Macedonia. The Turkish state is asking Macedonia to close some schools, some newspapers.
And we have the case in Croatia, which is a EU member, that our authorities are cooperating with Turkey in finding out the Gulenist elements
accept
in our
this
society.
kind of global purge?
Look how strange is the situation. Before the coup d'etat, nobody said that the Gulen movement is a terrorist movement. So now Mr. Erdogan said, and it is probably evidence behind this, that this movement was behind the coup d'etat. But this is something what
Should we change our mind? Our perception of this.
The same is with other the late reaction of Europe on the coup d'etat, but also the late and not clear reaction or signals from Turkey and from Erdogan that. Who is behind this? He accused him, but we need also evidence is that indeed this movement is behind this, and if it's the case, then need to be put on a list of the terrorist organizations. But in many countries, like in my country, it's not on the list of the terrorist organizations. And if in the court is coming a case and saying, okay, this person need to be extradited to Turkey, so but the judge said, but this organization is not on the list of the terrorist organizations. Why we should?
So what to do? What to do with them?
Yeah.
There is an office of Gulen movement here in Brussels, for example. Also.
And I think to schools also. So
Yes, and
the
so-
Gulenist Muslim movement is not something integral. It has many faces. And that is the reason why we in Europe, in the world, cannot understand the links it has in the Turkish society. Because it was not born yesterday or in 5 years ago. It has a long history. And for most part of this history, it was somehow linked also with President Erdogan because they were supporting the same
They were
issues
very close.
until the 2013 clash. So this is something that gives us an idea why we have to be hesitant. And of course, blanket arrests in thousands are not accepted. The only way that you can control a movement that caused a coup is to find the guilty ones, the one that perpetrated the actions, and send them to jail, not to run after everybody who at a certain point enter a Gulen school or expressed an opinion, because it was deep in the Turkish society, and it's like hunting witches. It's something that the government wants to show force, that when we have the coupists, the officers that did the coup, so they are guilty, and by association, everybody else is guilty. No, the roots, and there are very simple people that were part, not of the movement that had targeted Turkish democracy, but of the Gulen's faith, let's say, if somebody can speak about faith in such terms. So we in the West cannot accept arrests by the thousands because of occupation.
Not only arrest. For example, Macedonian government stated that they will accept some of the requests of the Turkish government, means to close some of the establishment, like, I don't know, maybe it will be the school or the Zaman newspaper.
It is a way out of this. We have the US case. Turkish government is asking for Gulen to be extradited to Turkey. They should present the facts. And if these facts are accepted by the US court, then we have a precedent and we can discuss about schools in Belgium. Until then, we don't have any requests already for Belgium. So it is moving on that direction, and I'm sure that after some time passes, some of these blanket arrests and all these purges will thin down and disappear. But we must not forget, 250 people are dead. More than 2,000 are maimed, some of them for life. So the change of the hardcore of a Gulen organization, if it was behind the coup, to a terrorist organization did not happen because of thoughts of beliefs. It came because they killed people, they bombed the parliament, they shot people on the streets, they moved armed forces to kill Turkish civilians. That's what turned the perpetrators of a group in a terrorist organization. I'm not saying that the Gulenist movement is behind that, because I don't have the data. But I say what the Turkish government says, and the distinction it does now for the Gulenist movement has a base, because the perpetrators of the group, wherever they were coming from, now they fought against democracy and they should be punished. But these, not anyone that they know or their families, that many of them now are without any means of survival. This is the rule of law, as we say in Europe, and that's why we will have to your next discussion about opening the chapters to see what this rule of law is about.
And before the opening the chapters, that is the framework in which EU as such can, put these things on the agenda, because these are in the chapters of 23 and 24. So when will these chapters be open, basically, at the end?
You know what is
What's
the
the
problem?
obstacle to those chapters?
You know what is the
open?
problem of the... No, please, you...
Because in the Serbia case, for example, you have this new approach of EU opening these most difficult chapters first. So basically, you have the hugest part to negotiate. So let's open it and see
And it's
what
a
happens.
way to have a direct evidence on
all
very
these things.
basic.
This is exactly instrument,
Yes.
and this is the only one instrument what European Union have to monitor, to look and to engage the Turkish side with rule of law, with all these critical points. If indeed they would like to keep the European part of Turkey, I say part, not the full membership, this is something for the future, but the European part of Turkey, then they need to do together with us this monitoring and changing of all critical points related to rule of law, related to freedom of press, to human rights,
Yes, and all
rights
these issues.
and so on.
It is very important to have a roadmap, because rule of law is an idea, if you say like that, but if you have...
Concrete judiciary.
Exactly, then you know, and you, as my colleague said, you can engage the Turkish society and government.
So, but why we
don't
are not
open it?
using this
We both
new
agree that they
instrument
should
of the-
open it. Most of the Europeans, if you think positively, all these chapters must open. But there is... I spoke here before about the customs union. The customs union allow any European ship or plane to go to Turkish ports and airports, with an exception. Turkish Cypriot boats cannot go, and Cypriot plane cannot land. This is something that shows that Turkey takes Europe à la carte. So Cyprus, the democracy of Cyprus, for the moment, is blocking these chapters because they say you get the European community, you get the European planes, all except Cypriotic from Greek, from the side of the democracy of Cyprus. Why do you do that? Europe is a whole. You cannot pick and choose whatever you like. But to go over that objection, we know that the problem of
missing the
Cyprus...
opening of these chapters is a reason of worsening
Cyprus
the
is
situation.
not afraid of opening the chapters, it's afraid of closing the chapters.
I have to stop because we have a couple of more minutes, and I think the issue of the refugees is very important, as both of you are neighboring countries. Bulgaria is playing, let's say, close politics towards that. Greece was very open during the many years, and it shared the biggest burden, basically. So, do you think that this will play good at the end concerning all the differences within the European Union, I don't know, from Tsipras policies to Orban policies to Borisov's policies to Western Balkans?
First of all, I strongly believe that a common solution is better that each country individually try to survive around this huge migrant crisis, although from the Middle East, from Syria, or from Africa. So we have, from some analysts say, 60 million people who are ready to come from Eritrea, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and try their better life in Europe. So we cannot accept this, and the Geneva Convention
Why not?
is not... Because this Geneva Convention is not an exodus covering. It's not a biblical exodus. This is covering indeed individual cases of people who are victim of war or of
But maybe path of
attacks.
history is changing,
But,
demography and some, you have global warmings, you have different aspects
Yes,
which will
but
probably
still,
change the
the
picture
Geneva
of the world.
Convention is not covering exodus. It's covering individual rights of each person who is victim of violence. And we need to be united in Europe. This is strongly also the position of Bulgaria, and find a solution which is in two parts. One part is internally securing the border with a new agency, with our redistribution of a fair redistribution of the burdens. But the other side is externally and find, and Europe use the power of Europe, and we are powerful. If you're united, we are powerful to solve the problem in Syria.
How do you, within the Bulgaria,
in Syria is not solved, we can make 10 meters high wall and we will fail.
But you will still have criminal groups. How do you tackle with criminals within your own ranks?
This is a scandal that still European intelligence services are not enough interconnected and exchanging information. We still know that only 5 or 6 intelligence services are sharing the information on terrorism with Europol. This is why many people here in the European Parliament request for European intelligence agency, maybe also Europol, but much more closer cooperation, because terrorism do not have borders. So intelligence services also should not have borders, and on security and defense.
But what Bulgarian security service and police is doing to tackle human traffickers who are Bulgarians who traffic people from one part of your border to the other part?
Cooperation with our partner intelligence services, monitoring the border. Also cooperation with the Turkish authority. Without Turkish authority, I don't think we will manage to stop these criminals. Trying again to solve the problem where it is starting. The source of the problem is in Syria. So then it's coming to United Nations, to Security Council, why we was a few years ago not united, why Russia and China was against this decision.
Just to ask the question for Greece, we see now huge NATO boats patrolling around various islands in Greece, but we still see little dinghies coming on Lesbos or Chios.
They look huge from apart.
They look huge from apart, but basically they are there. What was their efficiency until now?
No. That's why I said they were huge from apart.
And we see, and I'm sorry, we saw what happened to Camp Moria, which was visited by Pope Francis, and a couple of months ago, and now it's burned down. Then we see really terrible things going on.
The agreement of March has many legs. One was that Turkey cooperates with Europe and the flow is very low. As my colleague said, now it's a trickle. The second leg was that 50,000 people from Greece will be relocated to the other countries. Only 5,000 have been relocated because the European countries delay any action. The third was that we will work with Turkey about making the future of Syrian more attractive in Turkey and not in passing the Aegean. So if we do not fulfill all these three, then people will be slowly added to our islands. In Moria is an example of that. And if you keep adding people and not allowing them to leave, then you have explosions. And we are in the verge. Moria was a small disaster, but we are looking at even worse symptoms. So Europe must immediately continue the relocation. It's amazing to say that national proposals are not a solution, and then keep these proposals on the table, and all countries of Europe except France, Germany and Portugal are not taking refugees. I'm not becoming Bulgaria because we also have the same problem, but other countries are delaying the action.
To conclude, we have started with the March Agreement. Do you think that the March Agreement is in danger?
I don't think so, because this is in favor from the both sides. Turkey also needs cooperation and economical support from Europe. So I don't think that there's an ultimatum which say on this date we are not anymore going to fulfill our obligations. And Turkey needs to fulfill the obligations related to the visa requirement conditions of the European Union. We are not going to make some exception for Turkey. And from other side, when they fulfill this, for sure, also Europe needs to fulfill.
So no danger for the huge migration tsunami.
We must keep our eyes open. The most important thing that EU has to do is to understand that next 3 months the problem of Cyprus must be solved, and the keys to that problem are held by Mr. Erdogan to withdraw 40,000 troops of the island and leave both communities to agree in a federation. It's 3 months, because after that Obama goes, Ban Ki-moon goes, the Greek Cyprus president goes. So it is is either now or the doors for Turkey to Europe will be shut down for 10 years because a divided island will never allow Turkey to be part of Europe. My impression and my belief is that these 3 months Europe should do the utmost and we have a positive outcome, and after 40 years there will be no more Cyprus problem, no more problems with opening chapters.
Mr. Kirikos and Mr. Kovachev, thank you very much.
Thank you for
you
being
very
our
much.
guests.
Thank you.
See you again in another program, Balkans in Europe.
Thank you.
Thank you.